Welcome, everyone. This is Barbara Tien with Projectkin, and it's a delight for me to welcome you all here today for another installment of the cornerstone to Projectkin, the mighty Kathy Stone and Kathy's Corner. We had started this back in really as Ponga. Her first event was our last event for Ponga, and we felt it was so important and so valuable, wanted to keep it going, and it became a key part of what was then post Ponga and now Project Kin. One of the reasons it's so important is that for all of us who have inherited stuff, invariably that stuff is not digital. And finding ways to turn that stuff into digital forms and then do stuff with it is kind of at the core of what we're doing with Project Kin, and finding ways to tell stories based on the documents, materials, photographs, and special objects that we've inherited as families. So with that, let me turn to the mighty Kathy Stone and let her pick up another installment of Kathy's Corner.
Well, that's such an introduction, Barbara. I don't know if I can live up to that. So thank you for anyone who saw my video. And we had a couple people ask some questions. And just to give you a little background for the people who are new here, Kathy's Corner, and didn't see the video, Kathy's Corner is with Project Kin is based on an article that we wrote, Barbara and I together wrote, called the eight steps to take your photos from tubs to tales of yore. I think that's the name. Barbara can pop the link into the chat. And so last year we focused, basically each session focused on one of the steps. And so naturally, when we're doing so much when we're talking about organizing photos, there's a lot involved. And we didn't actually, we touched on every step and gave tips and suggestions of how to work through stuff, but there's still questions come up as we go. So what we're hoping to do this year is answer questions, go into some sections a little bit more detail, and mostly driven by the people who join us and need the help. So we did get a couple questions, and I thought we'll focus on, and if I have time, because Marcy sent me a question that's related to a different subject, and we could talk, if that comes up, we'll talk about it, and if not, we'll hopefully get to Marcy's question at the end. And if not, I'll answer it in the chat in Kathy's Corner. But one of the questions that came up has to do with scanning, or as we now refer to it as digitizing. I was chatting earlier with a photo manager colleague who started his business almost the same time I did, back in 2012. And we were talking about how much evolution has happened in this 12 years that we've built, that both of us have had our businesses, and that it was kind of almost mind-boggling to think of, back then. But back then we called it scanning, but digitizing is a much better, more encompassing word for what we're doing with all that stuff. And so we'll kick it off with the question. It was a question from Anne, and Anne actually I think will help me answer the question, because she's found a lot of different information out. I'm just trying to find her document here. There it is. Her question was, how do we, if we're scanning and you've got photos or two-sided documents for that matter, but you have photos that have writing on the back. And I thought I'd kick off with my thoughts on why would we even bother scanning the front and the backs with writing on the back. And to a large part, the writing on the back of photos is the old-fashioned metadata that we added to photos, where somebody'd write something on the back. Either, if it's nice, they wrote the date and who the people were in the picture. That's called really lucky when that happens. Or they wrote things like, this is me with the dog, and I'm perfect. It would be nice if I know who me was. Or this is so-and-so. I have a picture that's got, this is this is Dan, brother Dan. Unfortunately, both my grandmother and my grandfather had brothers who were called Daniel. So it's still there. One of them the guy is definitely an uncle of mine, a great uncle, but which one, we're not sure. So the writing on the back can be very important. And for me, the other thing it gives you as an insight, sometimes it might be the only handwriting you have. of the person. So I think those would be, because you can always transfer that information directly as you go into, into the description or caption field of a photo. Once it's digitized, you may just transfer that information. But sometimes we want to keep the actual back with the writing on it for a variety of reasons until we have that information captured. But also, it's the original of that information. Again, it's like the photo, if we don't have a negative, it's the original that we have. And so you may not want to lose that, because things can get separated in your digital organizing. And so whereas with the actual print, the writing's always on the back and they're attached together, the question is, how do we deal with the writing on the back once we've scanned something or digitized it? How do we keep the writing? I'm going to find Anne's question. What are the different ways to handle scans where we've scanned the back and the front, or the front and the back probably, and how do we keep that together? So that's sort of our topic. So coming from my background, as I mentioned, one of the ways professional scan, back when I first started, we hadn't yet heard of camera scanning back then. That was something used in a different field. It started to come out very shortly thereafter, but we did scanners. We used a lot of scanners, and professional level scanners, not all-in-ones off there as pros. And so my high-speed photo scanner, which for those of you who don't know what a high-speed photo scanner is, think of if you've ever seen a bill counter where you put a stack of bills in it and it spits them all out, pretty much does the same thing with your photos, scans them all at once. And my scanner had a setting on it to say scan the front and the back at the same time, which was really handy, and it got it all done, and it would label them A and B. So I would often just scan a whole pile of photos and not pick out separately the ones that had writing on the back, because again, from those of you who come before, I'm a big organize before I scan person. So I would have them organized in a certain way, and I didn't want to just pull out the ones from the backs. And I found it easier just to go through and delete all the ones that had nothing on them, and just delete them out of there, because then all the fronts were labeled A, and so but the A and the B's would still stay together. There was nothing missing. So that was one of the benefits of a high-speed photo scanner. But often, some photos you're not going to put through a high-speed photo scanner because they're delicate or fragile. So Anne's question, I think, is to me, an interesting topic, is to talk about what ways people are using to keep front and back together. And I'm going to throw that question out to you, because that's what I do, and I've kept mine together because right now they have the A and the B on them. But I'm interested to hear some of the information Anne sent me. So I might even make Anne talk for a bit here. Some of the information she sent me was something I'd never seen before, but ways where you can actually stack or put the two photos together so that they become almost like one, so that you can see both front and back. I know, Barbara, I was amazed. And brilliant. And then I was reading something else today that said there might be a way to do this in Lightroom, but unfortunately the article, I didn't have time to test it. And my Lightroom knowledge is not extensive, so it would be a testing indeed. And I don't know what version of Lightroom they were referring to, so I don't even know if you can do that. But Anne, you had some great ideas there. So
I think the one you're talking about is the image snippets. And I'm not sure whether image snippets is something that's commercially available yet. I was talking to Margaret Warren, who's the lady who's developed it. I think you know Barbara, yeah? So I'll tell you what I do. Shall I put the link in the chat?
I'll do it. I've got it in your document.
You've got it. Fantastic. Okay. And the idea is you can actually link the front and the back, and it's really cool because when you click on the picture, it actually turns the picture over for you. It sort of animates it so you can see on the back as well and shows it. So it's trying to actually emulate what it's like to actually hold a physical photo and turn it over. So that's one of the things that I've been looking into, but I say I'm not sure. It must be about a year since I spoke to Margaret, and she gave me an account to try it out, and I'm not sure if it's commercially available, if you can just get an account. So that's something to look into. Memory web is the other thing as well that you can link fronts to backs. You actually go into the picture that you've scanned, and then you choose to link a back to it, and it stays permanently linked. And then when you open up either the back or the front, it offers you the other version to see. So they're linked sort of digitally. The way I'm doing it at the moment is I use Adobe Bridge and Adobe Lightroom. They've both got different benefits, and I kind of like Bridge because it's quite simple and straightforward, and it's free for everybody as well. And what I do is I put the file name of the back in the metadata of the front, and vice versa, if that makes sense. So that they're linked by the metadata, and I can either sort of just browse for the file name, or I can copy it and search for it. So that way I see it. So they're not actually linked other than by a name that I put in. So it's a manual way of doing it. So that's kind of the ways I've tried doing it, and I've tried out Memory Web, and the image snippets is brilliant, but I'm not sure how available it is, whether it's ever going to develop. I'm not sure. Barbara, you've been in touch with Margaret recently. Do you know anything?
I've not talked to her recently. I talked to her actually also in the context of Ponga when we were in that difficult stage of knowing where we were going to do with the company, but not telling anybody yet. It was a little awkward. So, but she was lovely. And yeah, I also then, especially because of the nature of grinding down a startup, but even today would be just cautious of new formats and new startups and what they can do. She's lovely, she's committed, and she has done this work herself, but it's very, very hard, and especially when you're trying to build something out to solve a larger problem. So yeah.
And
Kathy,
Becky,
do you mind? Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Anne.
Do you mind if I add to what you said about the backs and preserving the writing?
Not at all.
Old carte de visites and the cabinet cards, you get the trade plates on the back, which have all sorts of information, addresses and clues and dating clues. And you know, if you've seen me on Twitter, you know I like the backs more than the front sometimes, especially with the older ones. They're absolutely gorgeous. So I tend to scan. I do camera scanning, which is much quicker, so I haven't got to wait for a scan to run through. So I do tend to scan the backs of everything, because I'm sometimes concerned that if I decide not to scan it because it was blank, do I know that it didn't get scanned because it was blank, or did I just miss it? So I try and do all those as well. So,
and I think that's a really good point, Anne, when we're talking about scanning. Like I mentioned, my scanner, my high-speed scanner, they automatically get a label, and they have the same image number, just a letter after them, much like Becky's idea of adding front and back after the image number. Another way so that you know that same image number, then the image can have the same number, just front and back. So if somehow the files get mixed up, you'll be able to figure out where it goes, because I've had that case where some of the stuff I scanned on a flatbed, I've got the writing, I'm reading the writing in it that's right beside a photo, and it's not the correct writing. I can tell, which is fortunate I can tell, but that makes you go, I wonder how many I can't tell. Yeah. And that's the thing to keep in mind too, is I was on a call just before this with, it was actually hanging out. We call it co-working sessions, but really they just seem to be visiting sessions with some of my photo managers. And I said, okay, so people who are doing camera scanning, what are you doing with this? How are you keeping them together? And much like you said, Anne, they're scanned sequentially. So you've got image 1 and 2 go together, 3 and 4 go together. But if you don't scan all the backs, and so then you end up scanning blank backs, because just so you know that there wasn't a back. And again, as I go through and cull photos, where I've scanned a whole stat, and this, I think you'll agree with me on this one, Barbara. When I go through and cull them, I delete the backs that have nothing on them. But then it raises the same question, Anne, is do I know that there was nothing on the back, or did I accidentally delete something? Which is why you have lots of backups, and you never work on your original file. You always work on a backup. But so that was another way, just labeling them front and back, so that they're at least in a sequence. But some of the ways that you brought up, that the possibility, I was reading something else, and again, I didn't get enough time to investigate it, but it was talking about that you can have a TIFF file with more than one image in it, which I also didn't understand, because I have to technology just went right out my, because I didn't know you could do that with TIFFs, but that would be potentially another way to look at. But I think the, just front and back, just so they stay together. I guess then the question becomes, how much of it do you save? You could save it all, like the fronts and the backs. The other things on backs, I've often, when I scan a whole bunch of the backs, like if I scan all the backs, sometimes there's things on them, not necessarily the writing. Like to me, the writing is the best. Like that's the cat's meow, is to have somebody's handwriting describing the photo on the back. And sometimes they're hilarious and insights into the personality of the people that are in the photo or who took the photo. But sometimes there's information on the back that seems like not of much use, but maybe useful when you go to do things like date the photos. And I'm thinking of some photos, even your 4x6s that you developed at Walmart, or well, I guess Walmart's kind of a universal one. We'll use Walmart or somewhere. There's often batch numbers on photos. And even in old photos, like the old photos that were all squares, if you'll see a weird number on it, and back then most of them were like 3 digits. But if you start looking at the backs of photos, and I think I talked a little bit about this last time, about sorting photos upside down to get them in order, as a quick method of sorting, those numbers can be really important when you're trying to put an order to the photos. Because if you were shooting pictures with a camera, if the developing batch all has the same number, that's going to be, they all belong together. And really important in older times when, like, well, digitally, you've got digital photos anyway, but when it wasn't cheap to print photos, like I'm in the 4x6, print an extra set for 25 cents. It wasn't as important to make sure that, that you may have taken more pictures then. Film wasn't as expensive. Developing wasn't that expensive. But earlier on, both were expensive and cameras were expensive. So there, you might have a batch number that has multiple events on it. So looking at the front of the pictures, you'd go, okay, these are all different things, and you'd pile them differently. But when you turn them over, they all have the same number on the back. So they were taken around the same time. Obviously, that doesn't give you a date. And even on 4x6, the modern developed 4x6s, the batch number doesn't give you a date, but it does give you a way to collect the pile of photos. So there can be other stuff on the backs. And like Anne, you gave the perfect example with the really old photos, like the carte de visite or the cabinet cards, or those. It's artwork on the back. Like the photographer stuff, to me, the whole thing is a work of art. Like I would never peel one out of a frame. I would never ever take usually find them in cardboard frames that they came in. And I've forgotten at the minute. These are probably early 1900s around the time frame we're talking. But the information, first of all, of usually the photographer, if not their name, sometimes the city they were in, can help you give information as to where those pictures fit to, and how would you, where would you put them in a sequence. So I think that's the importance of the back. Again, some people that were using camera scan do the sequence. You could do, if you were using a flatbed to scan, that you'd get the same ability, because your scanner is still going to number everything sequentially. A couple of people said that when they were actually doing camera scanning, because they're scanning into Lightroom or something, that they can, they'll actually edit as they're scanning, which to me would slow the process down, but it depends on when you do it. Do you do it at that time when you know what it is? Spending hours afterwards trying to figure out what they belong to. So they would actually add I'm looking for, somebody said what they did, but they'd add some kind of a thing, a sequence number, or add the A and B right as they were scanning, so that you'd have the two with the same image number and linked together. So any other suggestions? Skimming through the chat here.
I know my scanner, I think it was my Epson scanner software, does that. It just keeps a sequential number for each new scan. So it's easy enough to know the order in which they were scanned.
Yes. And keep this stuff in order then.
Mm-hmm.
And again, some just added like front, as Becky said, the front and the back. Using the flatbed. Edit and add front and the back at the same time when you're using a flatbed. So that you can tell. And that would be then very clear and possibly easier to tell if you didn't scan the back of something. Like if you know that you're renaming them as you scan, then you'll know, okay, I never labeled this front and back, so this one must not have had a back, anything written on the back that I've preserved. So, but I think a very important part of preserving that information that is on the backs of photos too. And one of the other questions related to that was when you were scanning the information on the back is, how do you decide if you want to keep it as a back versus use it for the information and then get rid of it? And I think it depends. That's my answer to everything. It depends. Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to save, if you've got a collection where lots of pictures had writing on the back, or for me, if I have anything that's got my mom's writing on the back, it's a keeper regardless of what she wrote. If it's other ones where you don't necessarily, if there's just sometimes somebody just randomly wrote a date on the back, I'm going to put that information into I do dates in my file names, but you could be putting it in the metadata as well. And then it becomes a question, do you want to keep the backs in your collection? And it kind of goes back to, and it's probably a good topic for another day, what are you creating? Are you creating an archive? Are you creating a legacy collection? Because I think those are two different things that bear chatting about. We could probably chat a whole session on the difference and what one keeps in each of those two things in terms of with our collections. So, and again, a lot of it depends on the time period. I have a lot of my photos that I've just finished digitizing that I wrote dates on the back. Then I won't keep the backs because I didn't write stories. I wrote the date and the month if I was lucky, and not just the year. So it's really not, and I'm hoping that because I'm able to still write stories and things for my children to go into my legacy files, I'll be able to give them something in writing that has more significance than June 1999 or something written on it that has more to it. But it's sort of a question of, and if you have a bunch of blanks, if you scanned everything front and back just to not bother switching your method halfway through, I'm going to delete all the blanks, because why? It just gives more stuff to scan through. And certainly I wouldn't go through something like, I love that idea where you can see the front and the back, just like turning the photo over. I think that was image snippets, I think, Dan. I'm not sure I would do that with blanks on the back if I put that much. And again, maybe you would with the really old pictures and not some of where we had a smaller quantity to deal with.
I think it's like you said, it really depends on what your end goal is. If you start with knowing what you want to achieve and then tailoring what you do to get there. So yeah, I mean, I'm collecting photos for different projects, and they're not family photos, so I want to see the fronts and the backs. Yes. And I look for unusual ones. Quite often it's the back that's unusual, not the front. So I would have a different approach to just the way I deal with my modern family photos. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I do much the same thing. I've got a bit of a collection of found photos, as they call them, that were just interesting photos, and a lot of them, of course, older ones. I'm going to get you to tell us in a minute what you found recently, Anne, because I'm so excited about that. But I look for old photos when I'm in farmers markets, or, well, not necessarily farmer, but markets and junk stores and antique stores, just to see if there's any really neat examples. And so for those, like you say, all of them are getting the back scan, because that's partly why I'm scanning them and digitizing them, is it's like a collection. Because if you don't have enough of your own family photos, you can run out and buy other people's photos too.
So do you have a secret code to tell yourself that this is not one of my own photos? Because I got trapped by that once.
Well,
I
it's
just
easy to get trapped by
wasn't
a
specific.
because I
I
had it
wasn't.
today. I have a big manila envelope that says, "These are not my photos," written on it.
That's what I do.
My
I
file
know
name says,
that, and same, the digital photo is called collected photos, not personal.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because somewhere down the road, I don't want some poor descendant to be sitting there with all these pictures going, when did somebody live in Germany? Like, this photograph is from Germany. Who are these people? So, especially some of them, I bought a bunch of them at one place, and they actually had writing on the back, like handwriting on the back. And so that would be even doubly perplexing for somebody down the road to actually try and figure out who those people were. So
I sent you one of my favorite postcards. Remember?
Barbara did, yes. And it's in that collection now. And I still want to go to that place one of these days. It's going to be a trip.
I think it's something to bear in mind when you are sorting your own family photos. They might not all be family. My nan had lots of sort of pictures of her friends, and I've spent ages trying to fit them in the family tree. And then my mum comes in, I said, "Oh, that's Auntie so and so," and there was no relation, and they were never family, but they're in my family photo collection.
Yes.
So it's a lesson to learn for your own photos as well, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So share with us what you found, Anne, because this is very exciting for me.
I'm very excited. Sorry, I might get squeaky. I do get squeaky when I get excited. I went to a junk store today. It's called an indoor market, but it's a junk store. And in the cupboard, in amongst all the china and glassware, was, just try and get, so there's no reflection on it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
This cost me £3. And it turns out it's an ambrotype. And I think, judging by the clothes and the date the ambrotype, I think it's about 1870.
Yeah.
So it's 150 years old. It's I don't know if you can see on the screen, but his actual face is really clear. There's marks around the background, but his face is completely clear.
Yeah.
It's really good quality. And I'm just so chuffed to have found this. And it was just stuffed away in a little cabinet, and it feels like I've rescued it. I'm already really attached to him. No idea who he is or anything. So that was my junkyard find today. So if you're on the lookout, I mean, this is gonna, all my photos like this, they actually have not family in the file name to make sure that they don't get mixed up. So
that's an even better idea. Yeah.
Yeah, but
no, I just love that. When you told me you'd found an ambrotype, I was like, oh, so excited.
I wasn't sure it was. I thought it was just by the casing that's so typical of a cased photograph. I thought it might just be an ordinary print that someone had put behind glass, but I must admit, I know I shouldn't, Kathy, sorry. I took the edges out very gently, and it's definitely an ambrotype inside. So yeah.
So describe what it's like for people who don't know what an ambrotype is.
It's a negative that's on a piece of glass that has then been, the back of it is covered with I'm not sure, it's some sort of bitumen. It's put a black coating on it. And when you look at an underexposed negative against a dark background, it looks like a positive. But the actual image is really fragile, so that they were always protected under glass, apart from the glass in a metal case with a backing on it like this one.
Yeah.
So, but I'm quite chuffed with my find today. Thank you for letting me share it with you.
We always like to share those good finds. And that I think too is, say, well, why would Anne and I or others collect these old photos? Is that, to me, that's history. I don't want all those things to just be a picture in a book anymore. It's like, and so much stuff ends up in, and I think it's part of the whole idea of why we're all here and what we're trying to do is so that our photos don't end up sitting in the junk store in a big suitcase because nobody knew who they were, so they just threw them all out. And whoever ditched the ambrotype is like, oh no, don't do that. Like you're in a area of rare existence of those kind of photos that old. And to think that there's photos back in the 1800s still, that there weren't that many, put it that way. So what else? I had some more questions. Well, I'll answer or try and answer your question, Marcy. Okay. So Marcy's question was looking for advice for dealing with two families' old photos when space is limited. And I get that one too. And trying to combine, whether you're talking about the physical, right? Yeah. I guess that maybe goes too with our session that we want to talk about what you keep and what you don't keep. And again, I used to have a higher value on old photos versus the new. Like if I look at all my 4x6 things I just finished scanning, I don't value them as highly as I do the old pictures from here we go. Like, who knew that the 60s was that long ago? Apparently it's 60 years ago. Who knew that? But I used to think like old pictures from the 40s or the 20s, like those are really old. But those pictures from the 90s apparently are like 40 years old now or something. Was the 90s 40 years ago? Really a long time ago. Then I'm like, how did this happen? So it's all your perspective on judging it. So, and I don't know what anybody else can chime in on. What do you do with the old photos? And I'm assuming, Marcy, you've digitized everything. Not yet. So we can't unmute you. There you go.
Yeah. These are old photos. They're from the 1910s to the 1950s. So they are rather special.
Yeah.
And some of them are quite big.
Yeah.
So getting enough space and I am scanning with a phone. I don't really have room for equipment.
Yeah.
I think my husband would ask me to clean out, a closet and go live there with the stuff because he does. I've got yarn galore and pictures galore, but yeah, it's hard. That's all.
Well, I think probably that for me, what I'll do with mine is now this stuff that's all getting scanned. And again, I'm a chronological person, so mine will be I won't have themes. It'll be in chronological order. I probably will have it separated for families just to keep straight, because I've got all my husband's family stuff, and then there's me. And as you shift through as a professional, usually your client is whoever hired you, and then it's their ancestors and then their descendants. But when it's your own stuff, it's sort of like, well, whose perspective do I start with? Like, do I start with me? Do I start with my mom? So you get a lot of families involved once you start going backwards. So I think what I'm doing is I'm going to save the prints, but I'm going to take them and put them all in boxes. I'm absolutely getting rid of all my duplicate prints of anything that there's more than one of. Even if it's old, it might go into my sample collection if I don't have a sample of a photo from that era. But for the most part, all the duplicates I'm getting rid of, because I'm not going to have the space either at some point. And then clearly label those, and I'll get archival containers. And for the very old stuff, you can actually get sleeves that go inside your archival boxes that are also archival to protect the individual photos. Because you don't necessarily want them rubbing against each other, even in a box. And I'm planning this on the premise that probably it's not going to be a frequent thing that people are going to want to look at the originals. They're not going to haul them out. And so I will take them all out. I've pretty much accomplished that. I did some scanning for a family member of a bunch of albums they had, and one of them was one my aunt made. And I still have the album with the photos in it, because she wrote in everything. So I've kept it for now as a reference and to make sure that the photos were a good quality scan. But I think at some point I'll probably take it apart and just keep the photos and not keep the album, because I'll keep scans of the album pages. And she didn't write in it, she typed. She typed on a typewriter and then cut little strips of paper off and stuck them under all the photos. So the look of the whole album is important too, but also it's bulky. It takes up space. So, and I have it because the cousin who had me scan it was going to throw it away. So I'm not that ruthless, Barbara, in throwing things away. I end up with collections. I've tried to restrain myself from keeping things my clients. I had a client that I scanned about 80 albums for one time that her mother and father had made. And they were in Germany back in in between First and Second World Wars. And then were in Canada and had all this stuff. Like they had original brochures from the Calgary Zoo and all this stuff. And I'm just like, I should keep this. And then I'm like, no, you shouldn't, because you have enough stuff of your own. But it's tough to get to keep that. And I've sort of now I look through and go, what can I get a picture of? Like, what can I take a picture of to save versus the paper itself? And that's a struggle that sometimes it would be lovely to keep it all because it's history. But at some point, Marcy, we have that problem. You've only got so much space. And as we downsize, Becky's got another boy. She gave doubles and triples to her brothers. I love that strategy, Barbara, or Becky. I just went through all my wedding photos, and it's amazing the number of people who culled their pictures and mailed me all the pictures of my wedding. So I like them, would pass it on, but that way they can do with them. And then crypts that your parents took and keep only those with people in them. That's another way that you can cull down. Keep a few of the scenery so you know where they were, but for a large part, it's a tough decision. Yeah, you've got from the 1910s to the 50s. Those are very old photos, so it's
as the voice apparently of keeping everything, just not true. I just want you to know that in my house it's the other way around. My husband is the keeper of everything. He pulls out the 1981 New Yorker and says, "Look," and I say. Anyway, my rule of thumb is that if I could find it more quickly on the internet, then I should probably let it go, even if it's going to a museum. And going to a museum or a historical society can be a really good thing, particularly if it references some kind of local history or something like that, including, family artifacts or, artwork or other kinds of things. I'm in the middle of dealing with my own family stuff. So really, I do get it.
And you make a really good point there, Barbara, too, is that we look at this and go, well, this is just my family. It's not significant. But in fact, everybody's family had significance in the time they lived. I've been looking at, I grew up in a city called Edmonton, that's just north of Calgary, and I follow historic Edmonton because people post and ask questions about all sorts of things there. And there was a favorite restaurant when I was a kid called Buffalo Bill's. And it had a big, huge statue of Buffalo Bill out in front of the restaurant. And it was set up inside like an old Western town. And so you were really winning if you got to sit in the jail. Like that was the prime place to get to sit, was in the jail. But they had all these rooms you could sit in and everything else. And they put little cows in your steaks according to how well your steaks were done. I have no pictures of being there yet. We went there, not a lot but it was striking because, again, as I mentioned the other time, I didn't realize I grew up poor, but apparently I did. And so it wasn't like a regular occurrence. It was special. So I've been downloading pictures that people are posting of their photos of Buffalo Bills, just so I can add a few in and write the memory of it, because it was like, that was a birthday place that you always went to. And it's so, like Barbara says, sometimes you can just find a photo of something online. And if you can get a better one, and again, I've mentioned this before, but my favorite example is the Bouchard Gardens on Vancouver Island. If you've never been there, you need to go because it's absolutely gorgeous. If you're from somewhere else and you're looking for a great trip, go to Victoria. I know we have somebody here who lives in Victoria who will tell us how awesome it is. But I've seen a lot of pictures being in Western Canada. I've seen an awful lot of pictures of Bouchard Gardens. And for the most part, they're not great. So it's like you could download really nice pictures of the flowers that you didn't take with your Kodak Instamatic that were taken, and get the idea of what it's really like, but keep the pictures of the ones that have people in them. Is sort of how I look at those ones. Is like all those, and a lot of times you have only like three pictures of people, or 3 photos of the Bouchard Gardens that actually have people in them, and then a whole roll of flowers. And they really don't look that good anymore because Kodak Instamatic, it was a fantastic camera at the time, but it really didn't have a whole lot of features. It was point and click. And back then, if you weren't a photographer, you didn't know about rules of thirds. And if you're trying to take a picture of a person in front of a building, stand close, don't go back far enough so you get the building in it. So you have a teeny tiny person in it. And apparently the viewfinders weren't that great because a lot of people have no heads on them. Like cut off right at the top. So it's that I like what you said, Barbara. If we can find things on the internet to show what that was like, then, however, if you've got a brochure from the Bouchard Gardens from 1960, the Bouchard Gardens might like to have that. A important place in Victoria might like the archives. You mentioned historical societies and museums. Archives are another really good place, because archives they're much like, we want to save everything that we can. Like, as long as we can find a corner to stick it in, we want to save it. So, and I've found with different photos, some from my clients who were well-known people in the community, the archives absolutely want but their definition was anything to do with philanthropy, with oil and gas from the area I'm in. Not necessarily just from this family, but anything to do with that is important to them. My grandfather was in the Second World War. He was a guard, and at a prisoner of war camp just outside of Calgary in the Kananaskis mountain range. And one of my cousins happened to tour the War Museum in Ottawa, which is at the other side of the country, and mentioned these to them, and they wanted them. They said, if you ever want to give away not only the photos, but we have artifacts, we'd take them. There's a museum right out at the camp that belongs to the university here. They'll take those things. And my grandfather was a regular guy. Like, he wasn't anybody famous. He joined the army in World War II because it was the end of the Depression and they were starving to death. Like, there was no, well, to me, that is his hero story, but he was nobody. If I told you his name, you wouldn't go, oh yeah, I've heard of him. He's famous. So it's important to think about what part of history, even our folks that weren't necessarily anyone famous, might contribute, and to look at places like that, just so you feel better than throwing it all away too. So another question that came up, we talked about if you scan everything on the back or keep it. I wrote down stack in Lightroom, and I think I mentioned that already too. We talked about why scan the back. Another question I had that was for documents and letters, what format to scan them in. So I scan them. I will say my favorite line, it depends. If it's like a lengthy document with multiple pages, I probably will scan it as a PDF, because I can then group the pages together all as one file to store, and it lessens the danger of the pages getting separated. If it's a single letter, I may just scan it as a JPEG. And I think, I'm using JPEG interchangeably with all the other formats you might want to scan as. You can scan as TIFFs. You can scan as, I don't know how you pronounce HEIC. HEIC, is that how you say it? It's good enough. Heck, I don't know. Because that format will be getting more popular too, and more widely used. So if you're scanning, like a whole bunch of letters, and they're just pieces of paper, I use a document scanner because it's faster, and I would never put paper documents through my high-speed scanner because of the dust, because papers are dusty, and dust is the enemy of any kind of mechanical scanner. You don't want dust, and glitter is the enemy beyond enemies. Glitter doesn't even come in my house. I get a card with glitter and go, nice card, but it's going right in the garbage, because if that stuff gets near my scanners, it's big trouble. So I normally would do them in JPEG if there's quite a few pages. I actually scanned a whole bunch of postcards as PDFs because it was easy to do the back and the front at the same time in the document scanner. And you think, well, why would you scan the back? Well, some of them obviously had the writing on them, but some of them, most postcards, that's where they tell you what the picture is of. So if you're going to save the postcard, the back is very handy in telling you what the postcard is of, and even better if it happens to have a date or a postage cancellation that you can actually read is even better. But so I did those as PDFs because it's a quick and easy way to keep the front and back together, and also not put cardboard stuff through my scanner. And I didn't want to spend the time because they weren't old age is relevant, but they were relative, but they were from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I didn't really want to spend the time to flatbed scan them all. Whereas if they were really old, I probably would have. It's another rabbit hole you can go down, by the way, if you'd like to start collecting something else. You can. I actually finally broke down one of my cousins had 3 albums, and they were the old kind, the tied together with string, the black pages and photo corners, and full of postcards that a relative had written back and forth to family. And there was some amazing stuff in there. And I had them for quite a while, and then I just gave them back and said, if you want to come and scan them, you're welcome to my scanners. But I just have to let this go. I can't scan. I can't have another whole collection of stuff that I have to deal with. So, and also another question was in terms of letters and documents is if you scan the envelopes. I do. I scan the envelopes again for sometimes just the information on them. And it depends on what the envelope is. Like if it's a typed envelope that I already have all the information in the letter, I may not bother. But if it's handwritten or there's important information that's on the envelope that isn't necessarily attached to the letter, or if there's a really cool postage stamp on it, then I might scan the envelope too. Other thoughts? What are other people doing with letters and documents?
I have a story for you of a precious, the sort of the life cycle of an object that had attempt to put information on it. My aunt, my elderly aunt, my mother's sister, sent my mother, I guess, a carte de visite with the clothes and everything, and scotch taped to the front of the image in handwriting of my aunt, so we know who it was.
Who did it?
Who did a wonderful, many wonderful things. Was it said somebody in Shriner's costume ? And it was a gentleman dressed in what turned out to be the traditional garb of Damascus in about 1880, something like that. But I had no idea, and he did not, with a beard and all, look like my family. Just it didn't. Shriner's costume or what. And so I started on a quest to go figure out what the story was. Long story short, I took a scan of it and posted it into Facebook, and a Facebook group helped me identify because another picture from the same family had been digitized and brought in by a scholar and added into an article that she wrote. And it was the same photo session. There's no question he was wearing the same outfit. So it was clearly the same guy. So I was able to reach out to her and say, this photo, is it yours? And of course, she was a scholar who was writing on the first Syrian family in New York, which has since become a Syrian community in New York. The descendants were collaborating with her on the book, and they now live in Houston. She put me in touch with them. I was able to return, because of course I returned it to them. She has since written an Esri story map that is fascinating, that tells the story of this family, and they were trying to find a home for their children. He was a Presbyterian or something in Damascus when he first came to the United States. He then was looking all over the country for a suitable place to educate his sons, and he ended up, believe it or not, at Earlham College in Indiana, Richmond, Indiana. And wouldn't you know it, my great-great-grandfather and grandmother met there. So what was the connection to that photo? I don't know how that photo got into my family, but nobody was in Shriner's costume. Nobody should be putting tape onto the front of an image, but it was a privilege to have that photo pass through my hands. And to me, that little spot of tape is a part of a story, and I'll go find it. I will paste a link to the article that she has since published in here, and you can see the spot of tape.
I'd love to see it. Yes. No, it's fascinating, and it's those connections. I understand the reaction to the tape. When I think I was only 9 then, we went to England. We took my grandmother back, who hadn't been to England since she immigrated to Canada in 1929. And so we got in the local paper and everything. And so we went with my aunt and uncle and my mother and my stepfather, and my cousin and I all went. And my mom did a lovely scrapbook with absolutely everything in it, all the maps and everything and all the photos. And she used white glue to attach it to the pages. So white glue is not photo safe. I will give you that tip. The white glue actually ate through the photos and stuck, the pages are all stuck together. But I'm going to scan the pages as much as I can, because she wrote what everything was. And then I'll reconstruct the album after, because I think I want to have that. But it's, wow. Yeah, so you find all sorts of tape is evil too, Scotch tape. I found a lot of pictures. Lisa's nodding, going, yeah, tape is evil. We don't want a Scotch tape thing. So we have a little bit of time left, about 10 more minutes. Are there any other questions? You can put them in the chat if you don't want to come off camera, or Marcy?
Yeah. How do you get the dust and everything off of these old photos before you actually take the picture of them or digitize them?
I use a couple things. I use microfiber cloths, which I know are bad because of the plastic, so I'm trying not to get away from them, but any kind of a soft fabric cloth. And I also have something called a Datavac duster, which is an electric blower. And so we often blow the dust off the pictures. And again, if these are really old and delicate, you have to be careful because it's really powerful. But it is, you can find that they're called Datavac. I won't look up the link. I'll just type the name in there. Datavac. But they're very good because they don't damage the photo as long as you don't blow it too hard and tear it. Like, you can't use canned air on a picture because sometimes you get the frost. You don't want to go near a picture with canned air or anything like that. And a lot of times it's just needing to wipe them and then scan them. And there's software too, editing software that will remove dust particles from photos too. So sometimes you can do that at post editing.
I decided to do something, and I got a brush. Actually, it's a makeup brush.
Oh, yeah.
That would be all right, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be good too. And that's another thing. I think mine actually is attached to the desk, so I can't show you. Like a horsehair brush. They sell them to Archival Methods is a good company. They're out of the States. Not so great for our Canadians because the shipping is not cheap. B&H Photo sell them. And they sell some that are the one that's actually it's stuck on with a magnet to my desk. It's, if you could picture two brushes facing each other to put negatives and slides through to dust them off. So that you could use that on pictures too. We used to just wipe them sometimes. Because you used to always when I first started, it was you should wear cotton gloves before you touch any photos. You should always have cotton gloves on. That's kind of changed to wash your hands or use nitrile gloves. No reason not to use the cotton other than but if we were using the cotton gloves, we simply use the glove to wipe the photos off. And again, it won't work if they're really dirty. Then you might have to take more steps to clean them. But if it's just generally dusty or fingerprints, a cotton cloth or something, just to wipe them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Gail, that's a good question. So maybe since we only have 10 minutes left, maybe can we save that for another session? What do you think, Barbara? Talking about filing.
I think that's a whole topic all by itself.
Yeah, that's what
it involves office supplies. Everybody loves conversations about office supplies. Okay, maybe it's just me.
So I'm writing a note. So we'll because I think that is probably, like you say, more than 5 minutes of an answer.
And
it's a great question.
It involves 3x5 cards, right?
Yeah. All sorts of things are involved.
You never knew my fetishes.
Yes. We find out so much about each other now.
Well, could I take a brief minute while we think of other topics to pick up, and I'll keep this brief. With respect to changes that we have coming, I guess it begins kind of with an apology. Thanks to Marcy, we caught a little bug that occurred with our fancy new system, where if you hit a subscribe button to the calendar, which seemed like a good idea, and I made any kind of change to any kind of item, you would get 10,000 copies of emails that for an email, or 10,000 emails referencing every single place in which the change was made, which is kind of a problem. So you know what? The subscribe button is gone. Also fired. So that's should not be a problem. But going forward, this is our very last Eventbrite coordinated event. It did its job at its time. Thank you very much. And we now kiss it goodbye and let it go. We are moving forward with the tool that I use on the website, the Talkify, that had its little subscribe button, but no longer does, to give you a calendar view of all events configured, and and Zoom for the actual meetings, because Zoom takes care of the emailing you when you register and giving you something that you can put into your own calendar. Always very helpful, and most of all, most people are just plain used to that. I don't have a mechanism. Eventbrite gave me a mechanism to have a follow-up email to say, hey, if you want to get the recording, be sure and go to projectkin.org and subscribe, because I email out recordings to everybody. Unfortunately, Zoom doesn't do that, but at the end of every event, I will have a little survey, which I will be looking at. And up at the top of that, it reminds you that please do make sure that you're registered so you can do that. And if anybody, since we've all gotten to know each other here and we've gotten so close, if you have concern, if you're not yet registered as a member, haven't signed up as a member, I'd honestly really love to know why. And you can just drop me an email to projectkin.org@gmail.com and tell me why, because I'd love to know what concerns are. I've tried to keep everything free and easy and not creepy, because there's lots of ways these things get creepy. And if there's something about it that's coming off in any of those ways, I'd love to know about it and fix it, because I think we're building something pretty special here. And I am absolutely thrilled to see so many people here, so committed, learning so much from each other and teaching me, and how we could make it get better, because it's doing something special. And especially, honestly, all of you who followed all the way along since Ponga, it's a special place in my heart. I really appreciate it. And you're, again, teaching me. So, any other questions for Kathy?
And if you think of questions, just go to, I posted the link for Kathy's Corner. Post anywhere in there, post after the video or anywhere on any post there. I'll get a notification, or Barbara will. And then if you want questions that you would just like an answer to right away, like it's an easy question, or to give us ideas for future topics, because this today is kind of what we envisioned Kathy's Corner being looking like, where we'll pick a topic that of interest and go far more in detail into what we talked about, like exactly what we talked about today was scanning. When we talked about scanning last year, we talked about scanners and DPI and all that stuff, but sometimes it's these type of questions where we learn a lot about, and that we're all going to encounter things. So thank you, Anne, for raising that question, because it was a really good one, because it makes me think about what I'm doing as well.
Yeah.
So
I think the topic of filing and organizing is equally deep in many ways.
yeah.
You know what, Kathy, they now have a message me button. So I will add that to the event. So you don't even have to, you can leave a comment that anybody else can chime into, which we like to, but also just message you directly. And that uses essentially a DM-like system that's inside of Substack. Okay, well, why don't we take that as a wrap? And thank you all again so much for coming. This was a great session. Really kind of what we'd hoped these kinds of things to be going forward. We're all figuring out together, and frankly, all of you have been part of making that happen. And I hope that's good for you too. It certainly is a thrill for us. All right. Thank you then. Aw, hearts and flowers. Thank you now. Take care.